You're listening to Accounted For, the Canadian podcast that explores the intangibles of every career. I'm your host, Daniel Lee. Hello, happy Wednesday, and welcome back to Accounted For, the podcast that shares and inspires unconventional career journeys. Like always, please help the podcast grow by doing whatever you can. Tell your friends, subscribe, listen in, all the jazz, share on your social platforms, and all the fun stuff, as well as subscribing to my newsletter at omdventures.com. It's a fun little way for you to get involved with what it's like to, build out a whole platform. I share my weekly journeys on my newsletters, so if you are curious on what I do on a week-to-week basis, definitely subscribe. That's completely exclusive to the newsletter subscribers. You won't find that anywhere else, but everything else is fully available on the site, like my weekly essay, my learnings newsletter, where it's a different kind of newsletter that just focuses on everything I've learned throughout the week, and I just write a short excerpt about each point. It's kind of like 5 bullets every week, as well as the podcast episode. And yeah, it's just a great way to keep in touch with what I'm doing. And also, it helps you not feel like you're alone in your journey as well. That's another value. Okay, today's conversation is with Elvis Wong. Elvis is the founder and managing director at Innovate Financial Health. I'm going to refer to it as IFH for the rest of this introduction, just because it is a mouthful. So IFH is a not-for-profit accelerator based in Toronto that works with startups addressing the problem related to financial health, and specifically, I believe, for people who are financially vulnerable. That's something that we discuss further in our conversation, and this is for financially vulnerable Canadians. There's a little focus there too. Having developed a passion for social impact since high school, Elvis leveraged his experience as a management consultant to join the Mars Studio Y Fellowship Program to find ways of using technology to create social impact. What he did not expect was that he would be solving a problem in wealth inequality that would lead him to opportunities working with Social Capital Partners, one of the leaders of impact investing in Canada, and starting an accelerator, IFH, that is backed by JP Morgan Chase and Capital One. In addition to dissecting his journey to creating IFH, we dig into the various learnings he has had from building an accelerator and strategies for forming partnerships and large corporations. And like always, I use it in some ways as a therapy for myself, and also a bit of a coaching session as I learn about building communities. And it's something that Elvis and I talk in length about as well. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Elvis. Hey everyone, welcome back to Accounted For. Today on the podcast, we have Elvis Wong. Hey Elvis, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Elvis here is the founder and managing director at Innovate Financial Health. And so Elvis, for our audience who may not be familiar with your company, can you describe to us what Innovate Financial Health is?
Great. Innovate Financial Health is a nonprofit accelerator here in Toronto. And what we do is we help startups that are focused on improving the financial lives of financially vulnerable Canadians. So people living low income, newcomers, people living paycheck to paycheck. And what we do as an accelerator is that every cohort, we select 4 companies and we give them funding. We give them access to mentors and advisors from financial institutions, fintechs, different entrepreneurs, the social impact space, and we try to help them grow.
Okay, so is that different from like a venture capital or like incubator? And if so, how is that different?
It's different from venture capital in that we're giving them a tailored program that they're going through a cohort, and we're not taking any equity. So we give them $25,000 in grants. Incubator and accelerator are somewhat similar, but incubator is generally a more early stage company that's focused, and you're really taking an idea and helping them create an MVP or a minimum viable product. In accelerator, part of our criteria is that the companies already have a product in market, and we're just trying to help them grow.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And so then for your accelerator, how does the business model work if you're just giving money and you don't take any equity in the company?
Yeah, so we're a nonprofit. So how we get money is through sponsors and foundations and grant funding.
Okay, well, so that might fit to the future business model of OMD Ventures as well.
Yeah.
So then right now, I think your current sponsors are like Capital One, JP Morgan, those are like the big ones that I've read about.
Exactly.
And so then those banks, like, what do they get out of sponsoring this accelerator?
Yeah, I think there's two things. So one is that our goal is to improve the financial lives of Canadians and financial health of Canadians. And I think what we found with both JP Morgan Chase and Capital One is that it's very much aligned with where their strategy is at in CSR philanthropic sense, so corporate social responsibility sense. So in terms of their benefit, it's the branding in terms of supporting this type of innovative initiative, but also the employee engagement. So the opportunity to really work with the startups and have their employees engage with the startups and learn from them and be able to influence them. We find that a lot of mentors and advisors are really excited about just supporting the startups themselves.
Oh, okay. So then these companies bring their own people in as mentors and advisors to help.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
We do have mentors and advisors from all the other financial institutions as well, but also from JP Morgan Chase and Capital One.
Yeah, there is that alignment and incentives there. Mm-hmm. And for your background personally, like, are you from Canada originally? Like, were you born and raised?
Yeah, I was born in Mississauga.
Oh, okay, nice. And so you've just stayed in Ontario your whole life?
Yeah, exactly. Born and raised, other than like college and university, but always in Toronto.
And why this venture to help low-income Canadians? Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that so there's kind of a long story in terms of how I got here. But in a general sense, I think that my mind has always been, how do we use tech for social impact? And that's always been what's driven me. So actually, funny thing, over the Christmas holidays, I was reading my yearbook from grade 12, and I didn't expect this, but a lot of the comments were like, hey, can't wait to see what startup or what nonprofit you end up starting. And this was, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. And wow. I didn't actually know that I was thinking that way in grade 12. But apparently I was.
I'd love to dig into it a little more, like, because that's very specific, like nonprofit. Like, you don't have many friends who, right, at least in like the high school age, like, I can't wait to do kind of nonprofit. Like, you start, like, what do you think gave that kind of impression when you're like so young?
I think it's always been what's driven me in terms of just trying to help others and help society, and that's like where I see value. So I've read somewhere like there's different things that people see value, right, in their lives. It could be making an impact, it could be money, it could be love and relationships, and there's kind of these different pillars that people drives what people do, and for me it's always been around impact.
Was that a big part of it, even like when you were like young, when you were 7 or like 8, where you like, oh, I want to help poor people when I grow up, or launch some kind of not-for-profit?
Yeah, I can't recall for 7 and 8 or 8, but even in high school, and I don't want to, like, I struggle with the fact that it's not like me being a savior and helping people less privileged than me, but it was like in in high school I was involved with social justice issues and indigenous issues. And then even in university, I was running our Enactus at Queen's, which is a school club, but we were helping the community using business and entrepreneurship to help the community. So we would teach actually financial education to different high school students, but also to our prisons. So inmates at our local prisons in Kingston that were just about to leave prison, and we would teach them entrepreneurship and financial education as well.
Wow. And I think the stereotype when I was applying for university was that, Queen's University is next to a prison. Like, I'm not going to say like that's the
next to like 9 prisons.
Yeah, 9 prisons. Yeah, that was one of the things that I learned about, because I grew up in the West Coast, and so I didn't know much about the area, but that was something that people would say. But you talked about the long journey. So we're going to go through the long journey, maybe break it piece by piece. But if I were to provide the listeners with the overview, so you went to Queens, you studied commerce there. Did you major in finance or?
Nope, I just took whatever courses
whatever you
were interested to me. Yeah.
What a refreshing perspective, doing something that you're interested in.
Yeah, I just decided my courses based off of who were the best profs. And that's really just what I did. Yeah.
Wow, there was no pressure to get a major?
No, because I was doing consulting. I mean, if you're doing finance or accounting, like there's certain courses that you have to take, right? But for me in consulting, like they don't only hire commerce students anyways. They hire a lot of engineers, geography students, so it didn't really matter which courses I took.
Also, you had already decided while you were in university that you were going to pursue consulting?
Well, definitely by my third and fourth year, I didn't know what consulting was when I first started at Queens. But more than that, I more so decided that I definitely did not want to do accounting or finance or anything that was super structured.
Okay, that's good. That's something else I think people forget about, where it's important to also know what you don't like as much as it is important to know what you like. And canceling things out by the way of like, I don't like this, I don't like that, is also a great way of narrowing your selection. And so you ended up pursuing consulting at A.T. Kearney for 3 years, I think, about. And after that, you went to Mars in their Y Fellowship, Mars Studios Y Fellowship program. And after that, you joined Social Capital Partners. And from there, I think Innovate Financial Health was born, where you've been operating this for about close to 2 years, right?
Yeah, about a year and a half.
A year and a half, yeah. And so I'm going to kind of start off at when you were at A.T. Kearney. And I come from a similar management consulting background myself. And so when you're in that kind of environment, my experience is that I haven't had many colleagues go over to any kind of fellowship program at like what would you define Mars as, like an incubator or a tech ecosystem?
It's
and
something
everything
like that.
Yeah. Everything related to Canada's tech scene. They have every program for that. So, but it wasn't a popular thing for a lot of management consultants, at least when I was in that field, to go and do. So for you, how did that decision come about?
So how that decision came for me was, I was around 2 years into Kearney. And I think a lot of people get burnt out from consulting. I was still doing fine. Like I was still enjoying my work and still learning. But really it was that I was traveling for Kearney. So I was going to New York, but also like rural North Carolina, etc. And this was 2017, and there's just a lot of exciting stuff happening in tech in Toronto, which was also something that I always was interested in pursuing. And then I saw this fellowship opportunity, and it had that perfect marriage of tech and social impact. So it just felt like the perfect opportunity for me in terms of what I'm interested in. So I actually applied, and I got a lot of support from people at Kearney. So my managers were my references. My partner allowed me to not travel to client site to do my interviews for Mars. So they were very supportive of me actually having this opportunity. And so that's really what happened in terms of joining the Studio Y Fellowship.
And what is the Studio Y Fellowship?
Yeah, so the Studio Y Fellowship, at that time, it was a 9-month program. And what it is that it's 25 systems leaders, young systems leaders across Canada. So the whole idea of the Studio Y Fellowship is to teach these youth how to influence change in these big issues. So there's a finance and commerce stream, which was the stream that I was in, but there's also health, education, and environment. And then what would happen is that when we start the program, some of us would actually work for Mars. So I decided to do that, but not everyone had to. So I worked for Mars's early stage entrepreneurship team and then also the corporate partners team. But on the side, we were all given a research project with our group. So it was actually that research project, which was how do we use tech to improve financial health and financial inclusion in Canada, that ended up resulting in Innovate Financial Health.
Oh, wow. And so when you decided to join Studio Y, though, like, was it a set kind of tenure program where it's like 10 months, and then after that you have to figure out what you're going to do afterwards, kind of like an MBA program?
Sort of. It's definitely 9 months, and then what it was that I was just taking a leave of absence from Kearney.
So you always had the option to go back.
Yeah, I had the option to go back, and a lot of people, it's supposed to work with whatever your day job is already. So you're not necessarily quitting to do the program and then finding a new job. Although a lot of people took the opportunity to transition.
Right, and I think you took the opportunity to transition as well, as based on the project blossomed. So after Mars, and you went over to Social Capital Partners how does that work in tandem with like starting Innovate Financial Health? What exactly does Social Capital Partners do? I think my understanding is like it's backed by Peter Thiel.
No.
Okay,
it's a
different one.
Yeah, this Social Capital Partners was first.
Okay.
No, it's totally different. So what happened was that we had this 9-month fellowship. We came up with this idea for Innovate Financial Health. We had a lot of advisors that told us it was a good idea and it's worth pursuing.
This was when you were at Mars?
This was at Mars. This was, so probably in spring of 2018, we were floating this idea around with a bunch of people we respected and getting good feedback. The thing is, because the fellowship ended in May, a lot of my co-founders had other plans. So actually, three of my four other co-founders left Canada. So one moved to Kenya, one moved to Singapore, one moved to SF, and then now in Victoria. So from my standpoint, the decision was whether I should go back to Kearney or not. And the problem was that I knew if I did go back to consulting, then this entire initiative will just die, right? So I decided to quit consulting. And at that point, John Schell from Social Capital Partners was one of our advisors. So I just asked him for office space. So I just started working out of his office. And I had a couple of different advisors that offered me, because at the beginning, this was just an idea. And at the beginning part, I was just trying to raise funding. That wasn't like a 40-hour-a-week job, right? It was just a lot of coffee chats and meetings. So I had a couple of options to work for 2 days a week, 3 days a week for a startup, or for the one that I took was Social Capital Partners. And Social Capital Partners they're really the founders. So Bill Young is the original founder of Social Capital Partners. And they're very much the founders, and he's very much like kind of the godfather of like social impact here in Canada. So like 20 years ago, like he started impact investing. So as Social Capital Partners, I started helping them out with some of the projects that they do.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And yeah, because since you left AT Kearney, there's no income stream anymore. So this was a way to like keep on sustaining yourself as you validated and tested this kind of idea out.
Exactly.
Why wasn't there an option to, in your mind, continue working at AT Kearney like full time while pursuing this on the side? Why did you feel like you have to go full into it?
I mean, like if you're familiar with consulting, right? You're working whatever 50, 60, 70-hour weeks. Then you're not giving the projects the justice that it deserves, right? In my opinion. And actually, Kearney was very open. They were willing to continue to extend my leave. And from there, I can still get benefits and everything, and my laptop and my phone and all of that. But in my standpoint, it was I had to cut ties, because then I'm going to actually work the hardest for the project, right? And it's like people think it's risky. It's not super risky, because like if I really do need a job, I can always just go back and get a job from Kearney. So that's the mindset that I took in terms of pursuing it.
And when did it start feeling like turning into like its own, like Innovate Financial Health becoming its own entity, where it transformed from just being an idea to its own accelerator?
Yeah. So what happened was that in May, I wrapped up at Mars. And then for the next 8 months or so, I just started talking to every bank in Canada, every like VC that I could get in front of, every like just different folks, foundations, to figure out who would actually fund it.
Would be just cold calling them from like LinkedIn?
Yeah, a lot of like Chase, I cold emailed.
JP Morgan Chase?
Yeah, JP Morgan Chase, I cold emailed. And I cold emailed them And it was funny. So I cold emailed them because they fund a similar initiative in the US.
Oh.
I didn't actually expect them to give me funding, but I just emailed them. I was like, hey, I want to know like why you fund this project in the US because I need to make the same case to the Canadian banks here. And then, so we had a call and then they were excited about what I was doing. So within a week, they're like, hey, you know what? We actually just started making grants in Canada. You need to like, you should apply, but we're like almost done granting for this year. You have like a week to like submit a proposal or something. And I was out on vacation in like Orlando or something with my girlfriend at the time. But yeah, I submitted a proposal and they were super fast. And so this was around December of that year where I closed some initial funding from Chase. And then probably around February where I closed some funding from Capital One. And then at that point, I was like, okay, now we have money. Like, then I should do this full time and start building up the team.
And when you got your funding, was it just enough to see if you can get like one cohort running, or did you get enough to get multiple cohorts at least for the foreseeable future?
No, it's just enough, like the bare bones to prove out the concept, get the pilot running,
get your MVP, right?
Get the MVP, and then now we're trying to figure out long-term funding.
Gotcha. And how did the Capital One start out then? Was that another cold email that worked?
I mean, a lot of these, right? It's not exactly a cold email. One of our advisors from a nonprofit, Prosper Canada. Prosper Canada is like a national nonprofit that does financial empowerment services for Canadians and oversees a lot of that work. So one of our advisors, Liz Mulholland, who's the CEO there, she introduced us to Capital One. But even then, it wasn't a clean process. Like I think we had our first meeting in July, then like made a proposal in September, and really like didn't hear a lot from them. Like they just kept on telling us like, oh, we're still trying to like think through this. And then suddenly they were like, okay, yeah, let's do it.
Wow. And I think that speaks about how like these things take time, and it's like you kind of need enough of a bandwidth in your own patience and your own resolve to last long enough for these things to pan out.
Yeah.
It took like on average, like some could say like it takes like about a year to get all these kinds of fundings settled out. And like, what was it like though, like while you were waiting and constantly trying to get more funding? What was that experience like?
I think what's scary about doing these things is in my mind it's actually scarier when you get the funding than like when you don't get the funding, right? Because I think like entrepreneurship and starting something is like sexy, right? So like for me to have done this and spent 6 months and tried it out and not get anywhere, and then decide, okay, I've tried this and I'm gonna now like quit. I can call myself an entrepreneur, but I can actually quit and I can go back to consulting and make a healthy salary. Like that's like the worst case. That's theoretically the worst case scenario, right? And it's not that bad, to be honest, right? What's scary is actually getting the money, because now you have deliverables. Now you actually have to do it, right? So to be honest, like the 8 months, like I was still working at Social Capital Partners. I was doing cool work. I was having these like interesting conversations. People were excited. Like it doesn't feel that bad. It's like it's a lot more nerve-wracking afterwards, I would say, actually, on my standpoint and in my scenario.
And no, I'd love to dig more into that then. Like the money comes in, JP Morgan's like, all right, here's, I don't know, like some like 50 grand or 100 grand, and Capital One says, okay, we'll contribute as well. What's going through your mind then?
I mean, I'm excited.
Yeah,
I'm definitely 100% excited. I'm excited, but it's like this nervous energy, right? Like you're trying to, because I think you always have imposter syndrome too, right? Especially from my standpoint, I think that a lot of these types of initiatives, that the type of initiative that I'm trying to start is usually founded with money already, and founded by like super experienced entrepreneurs that have money and like have the network to like do something. So you think of how Mars started, how the Next 36 program started, how all like it starts with a pool of money, right? So it's super validating to be from a grassroots level to be able to like get the funding, but it's also super nerve-wracking because I know that or I feel less qualified than everybody else that has done this before.
And that that imposter syndrome, like, I think many entrepreneurs I've had on the podcast, we've talked about it. I love talking about it constantly just because it's the more I talk about it, it's more like therapy for me to get over it. And yeah, I'd love to hear more about how, when did you feel it more, and how do you kind of handle it?
I mean, I feel imposter syndrome every day.
I love that. I love that honesty. Then I'll get a little more specific. Like you talked about how, it starts with a pool of money, but what I'm curious about is your business model, or the not-for-profit, is you're helping other entrepreneurs accelerate their business, right? That's what the accelerator does. And I'm curious, how do you build, or how do you earn the trust of these entrepreneurs that you're the person that can help them navigate these uncertain waters?
Yeah, so there's two things, right? So one is that I don't believe I'm the individual that's going to advise each of these 4 companies that we selected and be the one that's going to make a difference for the 4. Where I play a role is my ability to bring in a network of mentors and advisors that can support them, right? That's really where I play a role. So there's that element. The second element is that before we announce the program, I talked to all of these entrepreneurs, right? Like I designed the program for them. So for a year and a half, I was having coffee chats with any financial health entrepreneur that I could get in front of. And I was asking them, what are your needs? What's your struggle with the ecosystem? Where do you think an accelerator can play a role? And I designed our accelerator based off of what they told me. So when we actually announced our accelerator, we had 40 something applications from across Canada, specifically from financial health fintechs. And to be honest, I knew most of them on a personal level already because I've had these coffee chats with them. So I think that really gave them the trust that I was doing this for the right reasons, and I was building together the right network that could actually support them.
Oh, okay. So you went out and actually practically spoke with all the potential applicants ahead of time to understand what their needs were, and then you designed the program. And so when you say you designed this program, what are the components of the program? Like how does it help companies through this accelerator?
Yeah, it's customized, right? So right now the program is 3 months. We have 4 companies. One's from Toronto, but the other 3 are not. And every month they come in for 4 days, and there's essentially a set of sessions on topics that are unique, more or less unique to financial health fintech. So we've done inclusive user testing, we've done behavioral economics, we've done financial institution partnerships, and all of our sessions are with experts in the field. So inclusive user testings from Code for Canada, our nonprofit partner, has done that. We had the Behavioral Economics Institute at Rotman come in and talk about behavioral design and how you can integrate that into your product as a financial software. And then we do a lot of mentor and investor speed dating events. And all of our mentors and investors are all fintech VCs, or venture capitalists. They're all executives at financial institutions, other experienced fintech entrepreneurs, or people from the social impact space, or people with lived experience working with people living paycheck to paycheck. So we have a very tight network of the people that we bring in.
Oh, and this is a not-for-profit. So how are you paying mentors to come, or are they all actually also volunteering to this not-for-profit?
Yeah, everyone's volunteering.
Wow.
Yeah, everyone's volunteering. I think really the reason, we've been getting a lot of great support from the ecosystem, and I think a lot of it is just selling people on the vision and on our purpose.
And I think it's actually, for me, it was when I stopped to think about it, even for my own podcast, you coming on the podcast and other guests coming on, it's all people volunteering their time, and I'm not paying anyone to come on the podcast. And it's, when I stopped to think about it, I go, wow, it's crazy how generous people actually are and how willing they are to actually help when you just ask and kind of share the vision that you have with them, and if they agree with it.
People are super, super generous, and that's where my cold emails come in, right? But even for our program, right, we've had people that you would think are super like they're super well known in the Toronto and Canadian tech ecosystem, and they're willing to come in. So for an hour just to do a session without anything for them other than the fact that they want to give back. So we had Andrew Graham, the CEO and co-founder of Borwell, come in to do a fireside chat. We had Ernest Chi, who's the head of business ops at Drop. We have Aaron Burry from Willful and Ali Pradad from Progressa coming in. And we have this network of 80 plus mentors and advisors that are all willing just to come in and give their time just because they want to support.
But despite all this generosity, I think there's got to be times when it's been challenging to run this accelerator, build it up. And I'm curious, like, what particular moments kind of stand out for you as like big hurdles where when you were there at that time, it just felt so insurmountable, like, God, this is this big obstacle. How do we get around it? Is there one that kind of comes to mind?
I'm trying to think. Yeah. I think that for the accelerator itself, I think I'm fairly good at like being calm.
Yeah, you sound like a very calm person. even when we met.
Like... I mean, we like for the accelerator itself, right? Like you just have to think through the steps. Like, do we believe there's actually enough people that are going to apply and see value? And I just trusted in that. And I trust that we kind of hit this critical mass of support that like no matter like we can bring value just by bringing in mentors in our network, right? So I think the actual what I'm more concerned about is how do I deliver value to my funders and convince long-term funding, right? I think our execution, like we know how to do it, and I think that we can deliver value for the startups for sure. So it's really just how to make sure that your funders are satisfied, and I think that's a very hard to navigate because obviously financial institutions have their own goals in place, and it's just bureaucratic, right? So even though we have great partners within financial institutions, there's plenty of other financial institutions that we've talked to who have people that were super passionate about our projects, but it's just hard for them to actually get funding, right, for us because of their constraints within an institution.
Can you share some examples about that? You don't have to like name any names or anything, but just like the process of how, like, I think I've also experienced things where you have so many conversations and so many conversations seem like they're going to lead somewhere, but it just sometimes just falls short.
Yeah. So what was really pleasant about working with JP Morgan Chase initially in the US is that they have a very specific process that you go through for the funding. So we had a call. They gave me, this is the grant application, go through it. This is our feedback. These are the metrics we're looking at. Super crisp. None of the Canadian financial institutions have that. So for all the Canadian financial institutions, it was a lot of meeting a VP and they're like, hey, this is super cool. Let's bring this up to SVP. Hey, this is super cool. Let's have a follow-up meeting. And the challenge is that like eventually the conversation just dies because there is no process, right? So that's definitely the norm for in terms of trying to get funding for at least for Innovate Financial Health.
And let's get a little tactical there. Do you when it dies? Because I'm experiencing that too as I'm constantly reaching out to companies for like sponsorship and also building out like the whole service side of my business. Do you follow up like 2 to 3 times when it just seems to die out?
I follow up, but not in like, especially because we're gaining traction now, right? I show that we're delivering value. So I invite them, like even though I'm not following from a funding conversation, I invite them to be a mentor. I invite them to our launch events. I invite them to interact with our startups. And I think like I'm following up, but not with necessarily an objective in mind. It's just like keeping those connections there so that they can see how you're progressing, so that at the point where they are ready, they can reignite the conversation.
Oh, I love that. The constantly adding value first mentality. And I'm sure that there's been a lot of learnings that came out from these kind of reasons. What kind of other learnings kind of came out?
From what standpoint? From like my journey or for the accelerator?
I want to touch upon both, but let's first since we're on the topic of the accelerator, we can touch on like what's come up from the learning in regards to like partnering up with organizations or getting funding from these large companies. Like what you've learned from that experience.
Yeah, I think I made a lot of mistakes like early on.
Like what kind of mistakes?
Well, I asked for like dollar amounts that were bigger than their budgets, like their full year annual budgets.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So for example, like I'm like, hey, if I want to do this accelerator, I want like at least like $5 million over 3 years or something. So I would ask them, hey, this is like what I'm trying to raise, and they're like, yeah, that's like more than our CSR budget for. So I definitely got that. I was definitely being very super ambitious for the fact that I'm totally unproven and have done nothing yet, right? And it's a totally new idea. Like nobody else is doing this, right? And I think that I think there's a little bit of arrogance on my standpoint in that like I just believe that this should exist in Canada, and it was hard for me to really. I'm like, this should exist. You should just fund it, right? Because it's good for society, right? But you do have to recognize like whoever you're talking to, like they have their own mandates, and I think how I want to approach funding conversations now is really like being a lot more crystal clear on the different tiers and value at each tier that they're going to get, because it's a lot easier for them to make the case than just a blanket like, hey, this is a cool initiative and we want to be a part of it.
So when you like first reach out to like a new bank, if there are any new ones that ever pop up, and it's a fresh conversation, now do you approach it with kind of, this is the value add, this is who we are, this is the value add, and then do you try to initiate a follow-up conversation where then you talk about like, the funding, or how do you get them to first respond to you and show some kind of interest?
I mean, it's always going to stem from the passion for this issue. Like I'm always going to have to start with why does financial health matter in Canada? And we haven't mentioned it, but like over half of Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck. 1/3 can't pay their bills on time and in full each month. So it's like a significant issue, and it's always going to drive from the passion. And if the partner that's sitting across from me doesn't believe this is an issue in Canada, then the conversation is not going to go anywhere, right? So you always have to convince them of the mission first. It's just that where the conversation changes is that then when I'm asking for my needs, it's just more crisp in terms of where they can actually play a role.
And I would actually love to now then dig into that passion, the financial health side. How big is this actual like problem in Canada?
It's big. It's huge, right? It's huge. And I think that, again, right, we just said like so many Canadians living paycheck to paycheck, right? There's a lot of challenges in terms of accessing affordable credit. There's challenges just like housing as well, right? Like if you think of Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, it's hard to afford a home, right? So it's hard to afford rent. So a lot of people are struggling financially on a day-to-day basis.
And would you say that you said how the focus for Innovate Financial Health is for companies that are helping with the financial health side for the lower income families. Is this a more like kind of material problem for that demographic?
Yeah, sorry, it's not. I just want to clarify. It's not purely just for low income individuals. It's just for people that we consider financially vulnerable.
I see.
And a lot of people with high income are financially vulnerable, right? Because of debt, because of their expenses and all of that. There's quite a few people that are still living paycheck to paycheck that do have what we consider a higher income, right? But I can give you, I'll give you an example, or I should mention the 4 startups, right, that we have in our program. So, for example, one of them, Zayzoon, out of Calgary. What they do is they give workers instant access to their paychecks when they need it. And if you think of the challenge of people living paycheck to paycheck, let's say they're a barista at Starbucks and they get paid every 2 weeks, but you have to pay rent today and you have to pay your bills today. Well, some of your options are to either not pay your bills and have NSF fees as well, or go to a payday lender. But if you're accessing just the money that you've already earned, then that's your money. You're not going into debt to pay your bills. So you're solving a cash flow issue. There's another one called Cuber out in New Brunswick. What they do is it's a savings platform. A lot of their customers are middle-income women and mothers, but also they have a partnership with Momentum, where if you're low-income in Calgary, Momentum's a nonprofit in Calgary, where if you're low-income in Calgary, you can save on the Cuber platform, and Momentum will match that savings. So if you save $100, Momentum will give you $40. So it's incentivizing savings for low-income Calgarians. We have another Altruism's a financial education platform in Calgary that's based off of life events. So a lot of financial education and financial literacy is just standard workshops, but it's very hard to actually action on it. Whereas Altruism's about life events. So if you're going through a divorce, this is what you do to get your finances in order. If you're graduating, this is what you do to get your finances in order. And then the last one from Toronto is called Policy Me, and it's actually around life insurance and making access to life insurance better. And that's important because if you don't have life insurance, it could be very detrimental to your financial health in the future or your family's financial health.
Mm-hmm. And were these, I guess, they're all tackling different problems that can help with the overall financial health picture. For you, is there kind of a foundational crux problem that you consider to be not like more important than the rest, but something you're more focused on, where you personally feel like this one particular problem, I feel like it can be the 80-20 where it can solve a lot of the other problems?
From a tech standpoint, not necessarily. I think they're all important, right? Because it's all like, what we have to recognize is that everybody deals with different situations, so that each startup can tackle different demographics in different situations and solve those very unique problems, right? But obviously, from a government and policy standpoint, right, if you increase minimum wage, if you improve the social safety net, that's going to have massive benefits for society in general.
And on the topic of like increasing minimum wage, like there's also like other literature where it talks about how if you increase minimum wage, it can actually lead to potentially greater unemployment, because companies who don't want to respond to that will end up trying to like automate jobs. Like there's like all these like nuances where certain policies can work in the short term, but it might not work in the long term. Like how do you constantly like stay on top of all that and try to like think through this it's a very big problem. It's a very big issue.
And I'm probably not the right person to ask.
I love that honesty, but yeah, because like how do you handle it though, like for you personally? Because it's such a big problem, and it's not there's no, I think, easy solution about it for sure.
Yeah, it's I think that, okay, so I think there's two things. So one, I think that there's a book called Winners Take All. I'm not sure. It's all about kind of how to make a positive impact in the world and like what's work, and that advocates a lot for policy work, right? So I think that on my standpoint, it's just recognizing my role in this ecosystem at this time, right? And recognizing that policy has a huge role in solving the issue that I'm trying to address. But that's not where I necessarily know how to play, because that's not my background at this time, maybe in the future. So for now, it's just like keeping up to date with kind of all the literature and studies that are out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And on that journey, how did you figure out the role that you should play, like in, like starting an accelerator instead of going on starting a company that tackles one niche issue? And if you even after figuring it out, how do you kind of get comfortable with accepting that this is my role?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So at Mars, right, they gave me this question: how do we use tech to improve financial inclusion? And they didn't tell us what we should do with that question. So we could have started our own startup, and we could have done a policy paper of some sort. But the whole point of the fellowship is how to make systemic change, right? And when you're starting one startup, that's not necessarily like systemic change, right? You are influencing people directly, but you're not influencing a full system. And when we were talking to a lot of founders at that time, we were interviewing a lot of people. There were founders that were telling us how they started off with a mission in mind. So they started off with the idea an idea of trying to help newcomers improve and access credit. However, the existing ecosystem here in Canada with investors and sellers would very, very quickly push them towards serving high net worth individuals or serving high earning millennials. So they weren't getting that support in order to pursue these business models. And the thesis behind Innovate Financial Health is that if we provide these individuals with the time and resources to actually experiment and build out these products, then they're going to actually have figure out sustainable business models that work, right? So that's why we thought an accelerator and this type of organization is more important, because then we can help like dozens of entrepreneurs and startups succeed versus just doing one.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever have times as like your at least for me, like one of the reasons that people sometimes, at least I became a consultant, was the curiosity, the constant desire to like learn more, and then but there's also a bit of greed where you just want to do more. I'm curious, when you're running the accelerator and you see all these, you have your 4 company cohorts, but you've also seen all these other companies that applied. Do you ever have kind of an internal struggle where I want to kind of tackle this other issue as well?
For sure, in terms of other issues. So right now we're focused on financial health, but I think there's a whole like future of work aspect, right? Like how do like there's a bunch of other issues I'm interested in, right? So like future of work, how to enable like people to actually succeed when there's going to be more non-standard work in the future. Just said future of work a lot of times. Those sentences. Mental health, super interesting. Affordable housing, super interesting. Like my vision is that this sector-specific accelerators and bringing together people that are solving social issues together works. And I think that there's no reason Innovate Financial Health, that model shouldn't apply to mental health and to food security and mental health and affordable housing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I can definitely agree with that sentiment there. And we also talked about, we referenced kind of the learnings you've had so far from the kind of building the accelerator. And I also want to talk about the learnings you've had on yourself, like while going on this journey. Like what kind of learnings kind of stick out for you as you've transitioned from being a management consultant to going through a fellowship program to now starting an accelerator?
Yeah, it's like, what have I learned about myself? I've learned that there's a lot of skills that I didn't know that I had that apparently I do, I guess. So
like what?
So like I would not ever envision myself in this space where like my goal right now and who I am is essentially I'm trying to build a community, and it's very much like the success is very much based off of my personal coffee chats and personal network and all that. And I would say that like at Queen's, I was fully against the idea of networking. And in general, I'm like quite introverted as an individual and throughout Kearney. And I think that at that time when I was consulting, I thought that my skill set was more in the analytics and the logic, right? And I don't do any of that anymore. Like my job now is much more social and much more communication. I guess that's a piece about learning about myself. I think we've mentioned this, but even just, I definitely learned about just how do you actually get support and doing all of these cold emails and being able to actually attract people to whatever you're doing and building that ecosystem.
Mm. And is there a particular kind of inflection point that you'd say that you had in your career that kind of put you down this kind of unconventional path?
I mean, definitely the fellowship, right? Definitely, I started with a problem in mind, right? I didn't start with the idea of I wanted to do something unconventional. It was really just I was given a problem and I was given 9 months to think about it. And then I would read books about it, listen to podcasts about it. And the more you think about it, the more you come up with creative solutions, right? And I do think all entrepreneurs should start with some problem in mind that they want to solve.
And it seems like you had this problem that you wanted to solve even before the fellowship.
Yeah, it's funny. So I I think that the story fits when I look back in my life.
Yeah.
Because yes, at Queen's, I was running financial empowerment, kind of not financial empowerment student organizations. And then one of my first internships was at the Ministry of the Attorney General with the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee. And what they do is that they actually manage the money of individuals in Ontario that are deemed incapable of managing their own money. So people that have gone through car crashes and don't have family to manage the money. That's what they did. So I think the story fits when I go back. But to be honest, when I applied to Mars to be part of the finance and commerce group, my intention was not to stay in the finance and commerce group. So the only reason I applied for that particular stream was because at Carney, a lot of my projects were in financial institutions. So I thought that would improve my chance of actually getting accepted into the program. But I was much more interested in actually thinking of education and future of work. And that's really where I wanted to pivot to, but just so happened that I kept on thinking about this problem and now we're here.
Wow, I love that. I love that. I appreciate the honesty as well of how things work out. And I think that's definitely a theme with a lot of the podcast guests here, where it's, in hindsight, it all looks so like it's as if you planned everything. Mm-hmm. But when you're actually going through it, it never really feels like that. And there's all these like weird pivots. And
yeah, I have no plan. And I think for the past like 2 years, I've have no idea where my life will be in 6 months or a year, and I still don't know. Like I have a general plan, but also just going through this process, you do come like in terms of distraction, right? Like I have a vision for Innovate Financial Health, but I would also think it'd be super cool just to travel around Canada and just document stories of individuals and how they manage their finances and just get to know people deep down. It'd be cool to do like art projects in this space as well. Like I think there's just so many different things that you can do.
And I love that you're getting really creative about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think maybe you'll start a podcast about it and share stories.
Maybe. I'll need to do some more practice.
You also talked about how, you know, the surprise of how like, yeah, the skills you have now that people are like, wow, that's so valuable. But when you're in, you know, Carney and you were at school, you're like, yeah, I didn't think about it. I thought it was all about analytics, and I thought that was my forte. And now you're building communities.
Yeah, we can talk about identity too, right? Like I'm super interested in identity and I'm trying to figure out my own identity.
Okay,
but
yeah.
I think that part of it is like you and me both being Asian American, right? Or Asian Canadian. I think that plays a factor in how you perceive yourself, right? And I think it plays a factor in the fact that I always knew I was good at analytics and everyone expected me to be good at analytics because of that background. Whereas there's less examples of individuals that are quote unquote traditional leaders that are Asian American. So I think that influences your own self-perception, even though I don't think it's true. Mm-hmm. And then part of the journey is like discovering what's in yourself.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think there's also the quote or common saying where just because you're good or great at it doesn't mean you should be doing it. And yeah. I think that's something I struggled with early on in my career where, yeah, like I when I was in consulting, I established a brand as the financial modeler. Like that was my thing. I had partners coming from across the country to work with me because they're like, oh, like I heard you, like you're great at financial modeling and you're very analytical. I'm like, yeah, I guess so. Like, that's all the projects I'm doing now. And then I went to work at a hedge fund and I got completely blown out. And my feedback was, oh, Dan, your quantitative skills are pretty weak. And that was like, whoa. That was supposed to be my strength, at least when I was in consulting. And then now I'm working with all these rocket scientists and they're like, yeah, compared to our math skills, like that's not your strength. Your strength is talking to people and like connecting. Like, oh, okay, so that ties in with what people back in consulting said I was good at as well. So maybe that's actually the triangulation of what I'm really good at.
I had the same experience, to be honest.
Yeah.
So in consulting, like first, I don't know how, but people knew me as an Excel superstar. And they would reach out to me for Excel questions and everything. And I was fine at Excel. I also knew, but I knew so many other people that were way better than me. And I always called them out on it. I'm like, why do you think I'm good at this? Like, there's no proof. There's no evidence other than the fact that somehow people believe it, right?
I think so. For me, mine was I created an intentional brand that way because I wanted to be good at it. But no, by all means, yeah, like I was definitely, I think, overpraised to some degree because I started in consulting not knowing how to make a pivot table, or I didn't even know how to make if statements.
Yeah.
Like, that's how bad I was at Excel, and I eventually built a brand around it. But yeah, it's definitely humbling when you get different perspectives. You work with a lot of different people who can help triangulate what you're actually good at and get that, help you find the identity of like who you actually are and what you might actually be, put down in this earth to do.
Yeah. I forgot to mention this because you also had asked me, like why an accelerator, right? And part of it is like looking at your own skill sets and unique advantages. And for me, like I would not know the first thing about starting a tech startup because I don't have any of those coding skills, design skills, any of the skills that you would need other than business. But what I did have was just through luck and through privilege of doing Carney and doing Mars, was I had a network of advisors and supporters that could be super useful for startups. So I had access at a young age to financial executives at financial institutions and access to a lot of different mentors that could add value, right? So,
is that something you personally figured out was an asset that you had, or how did you figure that out?
I think it was pretty obvious because I had, just in terms of the people that we were chatting with when we were discussing this idea, I had, just because of like my background at Carney, like one of my former partners that I was working with is now like a very senior at RBC, for example. And he believed in me early on. And I think that helps, right? That's like validation, but that's also like the fact that I have multiple people that are in those positions that believe in this and believe in me, then that helps. I realize that that's a privilege that most people my age don't have.
No, yeah, definitely. And as we kind of get to the final minutes of this fun chat, I want to ask you some final ending questions that I like to ask my guests. One particular one is, what is a belief that you have that goes against conventional wisdom, whether it be in career or whether it's in the social impact space? I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so career-wise, I don't think people should. So my core belief is that I don't think people should care that much about their career, and they should. I don't think that they should. They should ascribe their value to what their career is. I think it's much more important that if on a day-to-day basis, are you being, in my perspective, for me, like, am I being a good friend, good son, good brother, good partner? That's how I see whether I'm succeeding in life. And I think that like you should work hard in whatever career you're doing, but that shouldn't define who you are as a person.
And did that belief was that an early belief that you had growing up, or is that something that developed over time?
It's an early belief that I've had growing up. Throughout, like I've definitely worked very hard through consulting and everything, but I've always had that perspective throughout, and I think it's just part of something. Like I, just through life experiences, I recognize that if you ascribe your value to your career, like any number of things like that's luck based can mess that entire projection up, right? So it could be health issues, it could be a recession, it could be whoever you're working on, that company goes bankrupt. Like, there's so many different things that could happen that just throws things off, right? So you need to see value elsewhere as well.
And if you could think back to your younger self, let's say like the 21-year-old Elvis, who might be just about to start a career in consulting, what advice do you wish you could have given to yourself then?
For me, I would say that one, I would say for me it's okay. What's going through my mind right now? I'm trying to like think through this, but
You can just say it all out
yeah,
loud.
all out loud. I was like, one, like use your benefits, because I definitely didn't do that.
I love the practicality. That's practical.
I was like, use your benefits, and then I was so dumb. Like I would we have expenses, right? And I think and it's just such a hassle to submit your expenses. So I definitely like ate costs myself that I shouldn't have when I could have just charged Carney for it. So for some reason that comes top of mind.
That's some deep down stuff that you got to maybe
down.
examine.
I think another thing is just like for me it's always around like spending more time with your family and your friends, and figuring out earlier on how do you separate and have that, like how do you do your work but then also have that time set aside where you're checking in on your relationships.
Like meaningfully actually engaging and setting time specifically for that purpose.
Exactly. Yeah, like being very meaningful in your relationships and reaching out to people, and because you never know what people are going through, and if you're proactively thinking about them, like I think that means a lot.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely, it's something I'm continuously working on as well, and yeah, it's a big one, and I feel like it gets bigger. At least for me, it's gotten bigger as I've been building out my own thing, and it feels like my life is entirely consumed by it. And so it's been, because sometimes after work you come home and sometimes it's something I found it to be easier where I could just be like, okay, now I'm just going to focus on relationships. But now it feels like every time I go home, it's, oh, but there's so many other projects I could be doing. And yeah, it's been.
Oh yeah, it's like this is. I'm still bad, right? I'm still awful with this,
but it's always like making the intention to make a change about that. Yeah, well, Elvis, this was a lot of fun. I learned a lot for sure, and I really had a fun time learning your story. And thanks for coming on and sharing that with me and my audience. Before we sign off, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted us to kind of share, like talk about, or you wanted to kind of share?
No, this was a lot of fun, and this was great. Just follow us on Twitter, and mainly Twitter. So at Elvis WC Wong and at Innovate_FH.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for coming on my podcast, my friend.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope the story was inspiring to you. Hopefully it also helped you expand your perspectives. Hopefully it also made you question the default path that you might have been going on, or the default beliefs you might have had. And maybe now it'll make you even think about doing something about it, doing something different, maybe challenging yourself, being courageous. Who knows? But regardless, I'm really happy that you took some time out of your day to listen to this fantastic story with my guest. And if you would like to somehow, in some way, contribute and help support the podcast, and maybe even just be part of the community that I'm trying to build with the greater OMD Ventures platform, really think about being a stakeholder in the platform. And the quick way to do that is to go to my website, oldmandan.com, and go to the stakeholders page. I believe it's oldmandan.com/stakeholder. And the link is also down below. And that's how you can figure out how you can subscribe, follow to get more updates on the free content, but at the same time also donate, and donate by actually just buying me a coffee. That's just how I put it. And you can buy me a coffee a month, coffee a week, or coffee every day of the year. And think about it as the way that, if you wanted to chat with me, you might just bring me out for coffee and buy me a coffee. Or if you wanted to bring one of my guests out to chat, you might buy them a coffee. So just think of it as I'm the service that's doing that for you, so you can just pay me in coffees. Don't worry, everything will still be free. It would just really help if you would like to show your support this way, so that I can use the coffee money to buy myself actual coffees, and also to buy my guests actual coffees, and use the leftover money to actually grow the platform, as well as even keep it operationally alive as well, because all this isn't really free, and it does take a lot of time to build it as well as operate it. and hopefully grow it further. So your support would be amazing if you would like to contribute. And so yeah, just check out the website, go to the stakeholders page, and read the different kind of benefits you might even get as a stakeholder. All right, thank you.